It is 100 years to the day since the guns fell silent and the First World War was over. November the 11th, a day set apart as a moment to honor those who gave their lives and those whose lives were destroyed by war. And good morning from Whitehall, where it's a fine morning after a stormy night. It seems almost every Remembrance Sunday the sun comes out, the clouds clear. Here in London today, thousands of veterans and their families have come to pay their respects to those who gave their lives. And for these past 4 years, we've been remembering step by step the agonizing progress of the First World War until it came to an end with the armistice 100 years ago. And to mark this event, this year, there are going to be 2 processions past the Cenotaph. The Veterans March past, which we see every year, and after that, an extra procession of 10,000 civilians coming to say thank you to the First World War generation. 100 years ago, the grandparents and great-grandparents of these families were about to hear the news that the war was over, and it didn't reach everyone at the same moment as it would today. There was no radio, no television, no social media, of course. It spread by word of mouth from town to town, village to village, by proclamation, by telegram. And as the news spread, the nation was overwhelmed with a sense of relief. The King, George V, stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace with Queen Mary to rejoice in the news with the crowds down below. That the armistice would mark the end of all wars, and then led MPs across to St. Margaret's Church in the shadow of Westminster Abbey to give thanks. And the bells started ringing. Big Ben, which had been silent through the war, and church bells in towns and villages across the country ringing out the news. Peace at last was the headline on the newspaper billboards. Peace at last. And that emotion was swiftly followed by the demand that those who died should never be forgotten. And in a year, this cenotaph, the first one built in wood, and then this one in Portland stone that we see today, inscribed to the glorious dead, was erected to remember them. And today here in Whitehall, across the United Kingdom, in all the countries of the Commonwealth, people will gather to remember. This evening there's going to be a special service to commemorate the armistice in Westminster Abbey, the church where the body of the unknown warrior was laid to rest, standing as a symbol of the hundreds of thousands who are buried away from their home or who have no known grave. And in a quite different kind of commemoration, the director Danny Boyle has invited artists to create portraits in the sand to thank those who left these shores and didn't return. This portrait of the poet Wilfred Owen on the beach at Folkestone, which is going to be washed away by the incoming tide. And back here at the Cenotaph, there will be played, of course, the traditional music of remembrance, followed by the 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock in the presence of the Queen, and for the first time, the President of the Republic of Germany, who's going to be laying a wreath in an act of reconciliation. 10 years ago, the 90th anniversary of the end of World War I, saw the last surviving British soldiers of that war come to the Cenotaph to lay wreaths. There they were, Harry Patch, Henry Allingham, and William Stone. And before another year had passed, all had died, leaving no survivors of the battlefield. But survivors of the Second World War and other wars are, of course, here today, as every year, to remember their comrades who died. And Dan Snow is down on Horse Guards to hear from some of those who've come here this morning.
Yes, I'm here in Horse Guards with the marchers gathering, greeting old friends, and I've got 2 veterans from very different generations. Denise, you're serving in the Navy today, but you're also here to remember a very particular relative of yours.
That's correct. My great-grandfather, who was a private in the 3rd Regiment, in the Surrey Regiment, his name was Alfred Beevor, and he served with the First World War. This is a picture of him here.
And why is it important to you as a serving member of the Armed Forces to be here today?
This is one of the most important, most memorable aspirations of my career, to be here today. I'm so proud and honoured to represent my service of the Royal Naval Reserve and indeed my family members that I've lost.
Now let's talk to George. George, you're a new boy.
I'm a new boy, yes. I've just joined the Chelsea Pensioners.
And this is your first march.
This is my first march. The first time I've done the Cenotaph.
And how old are you?
99.
And can you just tell us briefly, you saw service in quite a lot of theatres in the Second World War. Where did it start and where did it end for you?
Well, in 1940, I volunteered to go to Norway when they invaded the lowlands. That was after the Phoney War. And then I came back from... when they capitulated, I came back. It took me 3 weeks to get back. I came back. Dunkirk had happened. And we told Churchill about their paratroopers and that, which rather amazed him. And we were the only sort of active fighting unit. And he sent us up to Scotland to train with live ammunition. And from there, and then they recruited people for the airborne, and that became the SAS. And we became commandos.
And yet you served North Africa, Italy, Yugoslavia. So thank you very much, George, for all your service.
Thank you.
So apart from the... Now the haunting notes of the most reflective of Edward Elgar's Enigma variations, Nimrod. And as the last notes of Nimrod drift away down Whitehall. We hear Dido's Lament by Henry Purcell. When I am laid in earth, remember me. And as they play, we wait for the procession of clergy and choir who are going to be leading the service of remembrance coming out from that doorway of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Crossbearer leading the children and gentlemen of the Chapel Royal, the children in their scarlet and gold state coats. And the Sergeant of the Vestry, the Forces Chaplain, the Sub-Dean, and the new Bishop of London, the Right Reverend, Right Honourable Dame Sarah Mullally, appointed earlier this year in the succession of Richard Charters, who used to be here, formerly Chief Nursing Officer for England, ordained as a priest in 2002, and this then is her first Cenotaph service. The Major General commanding the Household Division and the Chief of Staff and the Brigade Major, and they precede the politicians led by the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, who come out next from that same doorway. Prime Minister and Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Unionists, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, and former Prime Ministers stand behind them. Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of the Defence Staff, without a wreath at the front there, General Sir Nicholas Carter, the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Philip Jones, the Chief of the General Staff, Mark Carlton Smith, the Chief of the Air Staff, and the Merchant and Civilian Services, the Fishing Fleets, the Auxiliary Air Transport Association, the Civilian Services, and the Irish Ambassador, Adrian O'Neill, with the green wreath there. And then the High Commissioners, who form three sides of the cenotaph, and each laying a wreath with two new High Commissioners here today from the Solomon Islands and from the Gambia. And the faith leaders follow. There are 22 faith leaders here today: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Zoroastrian, Jain, the Baha'i faith, Mormon, humanists, and spiritualists. So in the silence we wait now for the royal party, led by the Prince of Wales, and with him he'll have the President of the Federal Republic of Germany, President Steinmeier. Prince of Wales and the German President. And then behind them, members of the royal family, the Duke of Cambridge, Sussex, York, the Earl of Wessex, Princess Royal, Duke of Kent, Prince Michael of Kent will be there. And with each of them an equerry who passes them their wreath to lay. The Queen on the balcony watching this service down below. And the Duchess of Cornwall on her right, and the Duchess of Cambridge on her left. And we're now just a few moments from the 2 minutes silence. the guns of the King's Troop signal the end of the 2-minute silence. The Royal Marine buglers play the last post, and the first wreath will now be laid by the Prince of Wales on behalf of the Queen for the nation. And now, uniquely, the German president lays a wreath at the Cenotaph. The first time on this 100th anniversary of the armistice that ended the Great War. The wife of the German President, Frau Elke Budenbender, on the left there, standing beside the Duchess of Sussex. And now a wreath is laid on behalf of the Duke of Edinburgh by Captain Catherine Coulthard. And then the Prince of Wales, laying his own wreath. His wreath with its distinctive Prince of Wales feathers. And then the Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of Sussex, the Duke of York, and the Earl of Wessex. And following them, the Princess Royal, the Duke of Kent, and Prince Michael of Kent. order is given to the parade to stand at ease, and the Prime Minister Theresa May will be the first of the politicians to lay her wreath. Leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. Next, the leader of the Scottish National Party at Westminster, Ian Blackford, who lays his wreath both on behalf of the SNP and of Plaid Cymru. Vince Cable, the leader of the Liberal Democrats. Now Nigel Dodds, the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in the House of Commons. The Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow. Speaker of the House of Lords, Lord Fowler. And the last of these wreaths laid by Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Jeremy Hunt, on behalf of the overseas territories. This wreath made up of exotic flowers prepared by Kew Gardens representing the overseas territories, including juniper and snowberry and plantain and tussock grass and olive trees and myrtle and strawberry trees and mangrove, and a flower called Old Father Live Forever. Now it's the turn of the High Commissioners. And first those of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and India, who played such a huge part in both world wars, the senior members of the Commonwealth. 3 million soldiers and labourers from across the Empire and the Commonwealth served in the First World War, and in the Second World War, 5 million men and women, and 6 million from Britain itself. So this next group, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ghana, Malaysia, Nigeria, Cyprus, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uganda. Now the High Commissioners of Kenya, Malawi, Malta, George Cross, Zambia, the Gambia, Singapore, Guyana, and Botswana. Malta, which holds the record for the most heavy sustained bombing attack during the Second World War, 154 days and nights, 6,700 tons of bombs, and the place that was used for the launch of the Allied invasion of Sicily. The Gambia here because they rejoined the Commonwealth this year, almost 5 years after leaving. And now Lesotho and Barbados, Mauritius, Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, they changed their name this year to Eswatini, the Swahili word. Tonga, Fiji, Bangladesh, the Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, and the Seychelles.